The certified letter felt heavier than it had any right to be. It was one of those crisp, overly thick envelopes that screamed institutional aggression, the kind that costs $7 to mail just to prove a point. I was standing on my front porch in Auburn, California, holding my morning coffee in one hand and this harbinger of doom in the other. It was a Tuesday. The air was crisp, smelling faintly of the Sierra Nevada pine trees that surrounded the Whispering Pines subdivision, and I was exactly 3 sips into a perfectly brewed dark roast before my morning was entirely hijacked. I tore the perforated edge of the envelope with my thumb, irritated that the mail carrier had made me sign for it while I was still wearing my slippers. I unfolded the thick cardstock. At the top, printed in a font that looked entirely too medieval for a suburban homeowners association, were the words, "Notice of intent to lien and foreclose." I blinked. I rubbed my eyes. I looked down at the coffee mug to make sure I hadn't accidentally spiked it with whiskey. Foreclosure? On a house that I owned free and clear, paid off in cash 3 years ago? I read the first paragraph, my eyes scanning past the dense, suffocating legalese until I hit the actual financial breakdown of my supposed crimes against the community. Outstanding balance, $1. Administrative late fee, $75. Legal processing fee, $150. Non-compliance assessment, $225. Total amount due, immediately, $451. I stared at the number 1. A single dollar. A solitary George Washington, 100 pennies. 3 months ago, the Whispering Pines HOA had decided to arbitrarily raise the monthly dues from $149 to $150 to cover the escalating costs of seasonal clubhouse floral arrangements. I had an automated bill pay set up through my bank for the $149. I had completely missed the email newsletter announcing the increase, mostly because the HOA emails usually consisted of complaints about unauthorized shades of beige on people's mailboxes. Because my automated system sent $149 instead of $150, I was short $1. And because I was short $1, my payment was technically considered incomplete, which triggered a late fee, which triggered a legal fee, which triggered a non-compliance fee, which had now apparently triggered a threat to seize my 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom home. "Are you actually kidding me right now?" I muttered to the empty porch. I looked across the meticulously manicured street. The lawns were all cut to exactly 2.5 inches. The driveways were immaculate. It was a sterile Stepford wife utopia, and right in the middle of it, a bureaucratic bomb had just been dropped on my welcome mat. I didn't even bother putting on real shoes. I jammed my feet into a pair of beat-up sneakers, left my coffee cooling on the porch railing, and started walking toward the community clubhouse. The Whispering Pines clubhouse was a grotesque monument to suburban excess, a faux Tuscan villa dropped awkwardly into the Northern California foothills, complete with a terracotta roof, fake stucco, and a fountain in the front that perpetually smelled like cheap chlorine. I pushed through the heavy glass double doors, the aggressively chilled air conditioning hitting my face. The lobby smelled like stale potpourri and entitlement. Behind the sprawling mahogany reception desk sat Brenda. Brenda was the president of the Whispering Pines HOA Board of Directors, a title she treated with the gravity of a Supreme Court appointment. She was in her late 50s, wearing a pastel pink cardigan draped over her shoulders, her hair sprayed into a blonde helmet that could probably deflect small arms fire. She was typing furiously on her keyboard, her acrylic nails clicking against the plastic like a swarm of aggressive beetles. "Brenda," I said, stepping up to the desk and laying the certified letter down flat on the polished wood. She didn't look up immediately. She finished typing a sentence, hit the enter key with unnecessary force, and then slowly raised her head, adjusting a pair of reading glasses that were resting on the tip of her nose. She looked at me, then down at my sneakers, then back up to my face, her lips pursing into a tight, thin line of disapproval. "Good morning," she said, her voice dripping with that specific brand of fake, sugary sweetness that Southern women use right before they insult you. "Can I help you with something? We are currently observing quiet hours in the clubhouse lobby." "I just got this certified letter," I said, tapping the paper. "It says you're threatening to put a lien on my house and initiate foreclosure proceedings over a $1 underpayment." Brenda sighed, a long, exaggerated puff of air, as if I was a toddler who had just asked a spectacularly stupid question. She reached under her desk and hauled up a massive, 3-inch thick black binder. She slammed it down on the desk between us. The sound echoed in the empty lobby. "The covenants, conditions, and restrictions of the Whispering Pines community are very clear," Brenda said, flipping open the binder with practiced precision. She ran a manicured finger down a page filled with tiny, single-spaced text. "Article 4, Section 7, Paragraph C. Any assessment not paid in full by the 5th of the month is considered delinquent. Delinquent accounts are subject to administrative, legal, and non-compliance penalties to ensure the financial health of the community." "Brenda, it is $1, I said, keeping my voice as level as humanly possible. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my wallet, and extracted a single, slightly wrinkled $1 bill. I smoothed it out on the desk and slid it across the mahogany toward her. "Here. The financial health of the community is secure. I'll go update my autopay right now, so next month you get the full $150. Brenda looked at the dollar bill as if it were a dead rat. She didn't touch it. "I cannot accept partial payments, nor can I accept physical cash," she said, crossing her arms over her cardigan. "Our accounting protocols require a certified cashier's check or a money order for the full outstanding balance of $451. Once the account reaches the legal processing stage, the original deficit is bundled with the penalties. You cannot simply pay the $1. That is not how the rules work." "The rules?" I laughed, a short, sharp sound that I couldn't hold in. "You spent $7 on certified mail to demand $450 over a single missing dollar, and you're going to stand there and tell me you're just following the rules?" "I don't make the bylaws. I just enforce them," Brenda said, her chin lifting defiantly. "If we make an exception for you, we have to make an exception for everyone. Total compliance is what keeps property values high. You agreed to these terms when you signed your deed." "I agreed to reasonable community standards," I shot back, leaning slightly over the desk. "I didn't agree to be extorted by a neighborhood cartel over pocket change. Take the dollar, Brenda, cancel the fees. It was an auto-pay glitch." "The fees stand," she said flatly, closing the binder with a definitive snap. "You have 14 days to submit a certified check for the full amount to the management company's lockbox. If the payment is not received by 5 p.m. on the 14th day, our legal counsel will file the lien with the county recorder, and we will begin foreclosure proceedings. We have zero tolerance for delinquency." I stared at her. I really looked at her. I saw the absolute, uncompromising rigidity in her eyes. There was no reasoning with this woman. There was no appeal to common sense, no shared humanity, no flexibility. She was drunk on the microscopic amount of power afforded to her by the Whispering Pines Homeowner Association, and she was going to ride this $1 technicality straight to the bank just to prove she could. I slowly reached out, picked up my dollar bill, and folded it carefully back into my wallet. "Okay, Brenda," I said softly. She looked slightly surprised by my sudden calm. "Okay? So you'll be submitting the check?" "No," I replied, taking a step back from the desk. "I'm not giving you a dime. But if you want to play a game of rigid, uncompromising, down-to-the-letter legal compliance, we can absolutely play that game. But you need to understand something right now." "Is that a threat?" Brenda asked, her hand moving instinctually toward the phone on her desk. "It's a promise," I said, turning toward the glass doors. "You just demanded strict adherence to the letter of the law over a single dollar." Don't come crying to me when you find out I know the laws a hell of a lot better than you do. I pushed through the doors and walked back out into the bright California sun. My blood was humming. The anger had burned away, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. I wasn't going to hire a lawyer to fight a $450 fee. That was exactly what they wanted. It would cost me thousands in legal fees just to beat them in small claims court, and Brenda knew it. The system was rigged for them to win by attrition. But I didn't need to fight them on their terms. If Brenda wanted to use a technicality in a hyper-local suburban contract to threaten my home, I was going to find a technicality so massive, so ancient, and so federally protected that her little 3-inch binder would be completely vaporized by it. I walked back into my house, ignored the cold coffee on the porch, and booted up my computer. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for yet, but I knew where to start. Property rights. Specifically, the history of property rights in Placer County, California. Auburn wasn't just another suburb. It was the heart of gold country. This entire region was built on the backs of miners in the 1850s, a place where fortunes were ripped out of the dirt and laws were written with pickaxes and federal mandates. I pulled up the Placer County Recorder's Office digital archives. I started digging into the original plat maps for the Whispering Pines subdivision. The developers had purchased the land in 1998, a massive 200-acre parcel that used to be a sprawling cattle ranch. I traced the deed backwards. From the rancher in the 1960s to a holding company in the 1920s, all the way back to the late 19th century. And that's when I saw it. The anomaly. The beautiful, glowing loophole hiding in the sepia-toned scans of century-old legal documents. In 1892, the surface rights of the land had been sold to a cattle farmer, but the mineral estate, the rights to everything beneath the dirt, had been severed. The original owner, a prospector named Jebediah Vance, had kept the mineral rights, believing there was still gold to be found deep in the bedrock. But Vance died a few years later, and his heirs never claimed the estate. The mineral rights had gone dormant, reverting entirely to the federal public domain. When the developers built Whispering Pines in 1998, they only bought the surface estate. They paved the roads, built the faux Tuscan clubhouse, and planted the immaculate fescue grass, completely oblivious to the fact that they didn't own the dirt underneath it. Because it was a residential development, nobody cared. Nobody was ever going to build a mine in the middle of a suburb. Unless, of course, they were trying to prove a point to an HOA president named Brenda. I immediately opened a new tab and navigated to the Bureau of Land Management website. My heart was actually pounding. Under the General Mining Act of 1872, a federal law signed by Ulysses S. Grant that has never been repealed, any United States citizen has the right to locate and stake an unpatented mining claim on federal public domain lands or lands where the mineral estate is severed and held by the federal government. More importantly, federal mining rights represent a supreme possessory interest. They absolutely, unequivocally supersede local residential zoning laws, county ordinances, and most definitely the bylaws of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. The law grants the claimant the exclusive right to occupy and use the surface of the land for any activities reasonably incident to mining. I started laughing, a loud, echoing, unhinged laugh in my empty home office. Brenda wanted to evict me? I was about to legally transform my entire front yard, and potentially the rest of the neighborhood, into an active, federally protected, heavy industrial mining operation. The process was shockingly simple. The government doesn't make you jump through hoops to claim dirt. They actually want you to dig it up. I needed a topographical map, a GPS coordinate grid of my property lines, and a notice of location. I spent the next 3 hours drafting the documents. I had to name the claim. There was only one appropriate choice. I typed it out in bold, all-caps letters on the BLM form, the Brenda's Tears Load. The next morning, I drove down to the BLM field office in Sacramento. The clerk behind the glass partition looked like she hadn't smiled since 2014. I slid my paperwork across the counter, along with my debit card. "I'd like to record a new load claim, please," I said. She glanced at the map, then at the coordinates. She frowned, tapping at her computer. "Sir, this coordinate block sits right in the middle of a residential subdivision in Placer County." "I am aware," I said politely. "However, the mineral estate was severed in 1892 and is currently unappropriated federal public domain. I am asserting my right under the 1872 Mining Act to locate a claim on those minerals." She blinked, looked at the screen again, and then slowly looked up at me. "You're staking a gold mine in a subdivision?" "I am a very enthusiastic prospector," I replied smoothly. She stared at me for a long 5 seconds, then shrugged. "Federal land is federal land. That'll be $165 for the location and maintenance fees." I paid the fee. The clerk stamped my paperwork with a massive, red Official Department of the Interior seal. It was done. It was legally binding. I was now the proud owner of an unpatented federal mining claim. But having the paperwork was only step one. The law requires you to actually perfect the claim on the ground. You have to mark your boundaries so the whole world knows the land is spoken for. I left the BLM office and drove straight to Home Depot. I walked into the plumbing aisle and bought 4 heavy-duty 6-foot-tall PVC pipes. Then I went to the paint aisle and bought 3 cans of the brightest, most obnoxious neon orange spray paint I could find. I also bought a staple gun and a pack of heavy-duty weatherproof plastic sleeves. When I pulled back into my driveway in Whispering Pines, it was mid-afternoon. The neighborhood was quiet. I hauled my supplies out to the front yard. I laid the PVC pipes on the pristine grass and coated them entirely in neon orange paint. It took about 30 minutes to dry in the California sun. While they were drying, I printed out copies of my stamped BLM notice of location and sealed them inside the weatherproof plastic sleeves. Armed with a post hole digger, I walked to the exact northeast corner of my property line. It was right on the edge of the sidewalk, perfectly visible to anyone driving by. I dug a deep hole, shoved the first orange pipe in, and packed the dirt tightly around it. It stood 6 feet tall, a glowing neon middle finger to the neighborhood aesthetic. I stapled the legal notice to the post. I repeated the process at the northwest, southeast, and southwest corners of my lot. My perfectly manicured suburban yard now looked like a quarantine zone for a radioactive spill. I was just finishing stapling the final notice to the post near my driveway when a silver Mercedes SUV rolled slowly down the street and slammed on the brakes directly in front of my house. The tinted window hummed down. It was Brenda. She was clutching her steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. "What on earth are you doing?" she shrieked, leaning across the passenger seat to glare at me. "Take those hideous orange things down immediately. That is a gross violation of the community landscaping codes. Are you out of your mind?" I casually wiped some dirt off my hands and walked over to the edge of the street, stopping exactly 1 inch behind my property line. "Brenda, good afternoon," I said cheerfully. "I can't take them down. That would be a violation of federal law. These are the official boundary markers for the Brenda's Tears Lode, my active, federally recognized mining claim." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out for a second. She looked at the neon pipe, then back at me. "A what? A mining claim? You live in a homeowners association, you lunatic. You can't just declare your yard a mine." "I didn't declare it, Brenda. The federal government did." I pointed to the plastic sleeve. "You're welcome to read the notice of location, but I strongly advise you not to step foot past this sidewalk. Trespassing on an active federal mining claim carries severe federal penalties. The BLM gets very cranky about claim jumping." "I am going to fine you $1,000 a day for this," she screamed, her face turning a blotchy shade of crimson. I am going to have our lawyers evict you by the end of the week." "You can try," I smiled, leaning slightly toward the car. "But you should probably let your lawyers know that under the Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution, federal mining rights entirely preempt local HOA covenants. You don't have jurisdiction here anymore, Brenda. I answer to the Department of the Interior now." She rolled the window up so fast it almost caught her hair, slammed her foot on the gas, and sped off toward the clubhouse. I stood in my driveway, surrounded by my neon orange monuments, and took a deep breath. The war had officially started, and I was about to bring in the heavy artillery. Here is the thing about the General Mining Act of 1872. You can't just hammer some PVC pipes into your lawn, declare yourself a gold baron, and call it a day. The federal government actually expects you to work the claim. It's called assessment work. To maintain your possessory rights, you have to literally prove you are actively exploring for or extracting minerals. I mean, you have to move some serious dirt. So, honestly, I guess I had no choice but to hire a guy. I found Jim's excavation and trenching on a local community board. When Jim rolled up to my house the next morning in a dually Ford F-350 that had definitely seen better decades, he looked exactly like a guy who moves dirt for a living. He was wearing faded Carhartts, a battered baseball cap, and he had a pinch of chewing tobacco tucked firmly in his lower lip. He stepped out of his truck, boots crunching on the pristine Whispering Pines asphalt, and just stared at my neon orange PVC pipes for a solid minute. "All right, buddy," Jim said, spitting a brown stream into the gutter. "I got your voicemail. You said you need a trench, but I'm looking at a front lawn that looks like it belongs on a golf course. You sure you got the right address?" "I'm sure, Jim," I said, walking out to meet him. "And I don't need a trench. I need an exploratory adit." Jim squinted at me. "A what?" "An exploratory adit," I repeated, handing him a clipboard with a heavily modified topographic map of my front yard. "It's a horizontal excavation used in mining. I need you to bring a backhoe into this gated community and dig a 20-foot-long, 6-foot-deep cut right through the middle of the immaculate fescue grass, starting right about where my wife's ornamental rose bushes used to be." Jim looked from the clipboard, to me, to the house, and then back to the street, where a woman jogging with a golden retriever was already giving us a highly suspicious glare. "You want me to bring a piece of heavy machinery into this neighborhood," Jim said slowly, as if making sure he heard me right, "and tear up your entire front yard, and you want me to start today?" "I have the federal permit right here," I said, tapping the laminated notice of location attached to my boundary marker. "I'm paying your emergency day rate in cash. Can we get the Caterpillar in here or not?" Jim stared at me for another 10 seconds. A slow, wide grin spread across his face, revealing teeth that had seen a lot of black coffee. "Mister, I don't know who you're trying to piss off, but honestly, I am absolutely here for it. Let me go get my rig." 2 hours later, the serenity of Whispering Pines was violently shattered. The rumble of Jim's diesel flatbed truck echoed through the neighborhood like a localized earthquake. On the back of the trailer sat a massive yellow Caterpillar mini excavator. He didn't even bother trying to be quiet. The heavy steel treads clanged aggressively against the pavement as he backed the machine off the ramp and directly onto my lawn. The first scoop of the bucket hit the ground with a sickening, tearing sound. It was magnificent. The pristine, aggressively fertilized suburban soil was ripped open, exposing the dark, raw California clay underneath. I was standing on my porch, wearing a bright yellow OSHA-compliant hard hat and a high-visibility vest I bought at Home Depot on the way back from the BLM office. Because, safety first, right? Within 20 minutes, Jim had carved a jagged, gaping trench straight through the middle of the lawn. Piles of dirt were stacking up next to my mailbox. The noise was deafening. The smell of diesel fumes completely overpowered the neighborhood's usual scent of fabric softener and expensive mulch. My phone started vibrating in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a barrage of push notifications. The HOA community portal was absolutely melting down. Urgent. What is happening at Lot 42? Has anyone called the police? There is a bulldozer on Elm Street. Brenda, do something. My windows are rattling. Then, my email pinged. It was from Brenda. The subject line was just the word cease typed 8 times in all caps. I didn't even open it. I just swiped to delete. 10 minutes later, the physical resistance arrived. It wasn't Brenda, though. She was apparently too cowardly to face the machinery herself. Instead, I saw a golf cart speeding down the street, driven by a pale, terrified-looking teenager wearing a Whispering Pines pool attendant polo shirt. It was Kyle. Poor 19-year-old Kyle. He parked the golf cart at a safe distance and jogged up to the edge of my property, holding a white envelope like it was a live grenade. He stopped exactly at the sidewalk line, eyeing the neon orange boundary markers. "Excuse me, sir," Kyle yelled over the roar of the excavator. "Sir, Brenda told me I have to give this to you." I walked down the driveway, completely ignoring the fact that Jim was currently uprooting the community-mandated dwarf maple tree near the curb. I took the envelope from Kyle. It was a formal cease and desist order, drafted on the HOA management company's letterhead, demanding an immediate halt to all unauthorized landscaping alterations. "Thanks, Kyle," I said loudly. "You can tell Brenda I received it, and tell her if she wants to deliver federal documents, she should probably use the postal service next time. Have a good shift at the pool, buddy." Kyle nodded nervously, practically sprinting back to his golf cart. He sped off, clearly not wanting to be anywhere near the fallout zone. I crumbled the cease and desist into a ball and tossed it into the open trench. The real showdown started exactly 45 minutes later. The wail of sirens cut through the diesel noise. 2 Auburn Police Department cruisers turned onto Elm Street, their light bars flashing a brilliant, frantic red and blue against the suburban houses. They parked diagonally across the street, effectively blocking traffic. Out stepped 2 officers. They looked annoyed. Honestly, I couldn't blame them. They probably thought they were responding to a neighborly fistfight over a property line, not an active strip mine. And right behind them, pulling up in her silver Mercedes, was Brenda. She threw her car in park and marched toward the officers, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. "Arrest him!" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "He is destroying property. He is violating a dozen noise ordinances. He is completely unhinged. I demand you take him to jail right now." I tapped Jim on the shoulder and gave him a thumbs up. He powered down the excavator, the engine winding down to a heavy silence. The sudden quiet in the neighborhood was almost ringing in my ears. I adjusted my yellow hard hat, picked up a thick, black, heavily laminated binder I had prepared specifically for this moment, and walked down the driveway to meet the officers. I stopped at my property line, keeping my toes firmly behind the sidewalk. "Afternoon, officers," I said, offering a polite nod. "Can I help you?" The older officer, a guy with a thick mustache and a name tag that read Harrison, hooked his thumbs into his duty belt and looked at the massive crater in my yard. "Sir, we received multiple calls about a noise complaint, vandalism, and a property dispute," Officer Harrison said, his tone perfectly neutral. "The HOA president here is stating you don't have authorization to be doing heavy excavation." "He doesn't!" Brenda yelled, stepping up next to the officer. "He didn't submit an architectural review form. He didn't pay the deposit. This is illegal." "Officer," I said calmly, opening my binder, "I am not doing landscaping. I am conducting assessment work on an active, federally recognized unpatented mining claim. The land we are standing next to is currently under the jurisdiction of the Department of the Interior." Both officers stared at me. Harrison blinked. "A mining claim. Sir, this is a residential neighborhood." "I am well aware," I said. I pulled out the stamped notice of location from the BLM and handed it to him. However, the mineral rights beneath this subdivision were severed in 1892. They reverted to the public domain. Under the General Mining Act of 1872, I have lawfully staked a claim on those minerals. The federal government has granted me the exclusive possessory right to use the surface of this land for mining purposes. Harrison looked at the stamped federal document. He read it once. Then he read it again. He looked at the neon orange pipes. Then he looked at the younger officer next to him, who just shrugged, completely lost. "This is ridiculous," Brenda screamed, trying to snatch the paper out of the officer's hand. "He's making this up. It's a fake piece of paper. Arrest him for vandalism." "Ma'am, please step back," Harrison said sharply, pulling the paper away from her. He looked back at me. "Sir, even if this is a federal claim, you're violating local noise ordinances with that machine." I flipped to the second tab in my binder. "Actually, officer, as you know, federal law supersedes local and state ordinances under the Supremacy Clause. The courts have consistently held that local regulations cannot prohibit or unreasonably restrict activities that are reasonably incident to mining on a valid federal claim. Digging an exploratory adite is a requirement of the law. I am literally just complying with federal mandates." I paused, letting that sink in, then flipped to the third tab. I pointed to a highlighted section of text. "Furthermore," I continued, making sure my voice carried so Brenda could hear every single word, "I would like to formally notify you that this property is a protected federal mining zone. If Brenda, or any agent of the HOA, crosses that sidewalk onto my claim and attempts to interfere with my mining operation, I will press federal charges under 18 U.S.C. paragraph 1856, which makes it a federal crime to trespass, destroy, or interfere with a lawful mining claim. The penalty is fines and up to a year in federal prison." The color drained entirely from Brenda's face. She looked at me like I had just grown a second head. "Prison?" she whispered. Officer Harrison sighed heavily, a deep, tired sound of a man who realized he was way above his pay grade. He handed the BLM notice back to me. "I'm calling the shift sergeant," he muttered to his partner. He walked back to his cruiser, got on the radio, and spent the next 10 minutes talking in hushed, animated tones. Brenda stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, tapping her foot, radiating an aura of furious, impatient entitlement. She was absolutely certain the sergeant was going to order a SWAT team to take me down. Finally, Harrison walked back over. He looked at Brenda, then looked at me. "All right," Harrison said, adjusting his belt. "I just got off the phone with the duty lieutenant, who just got off the phone with a buddy at the county prosecutor's office." He turned to Brenda. "Ma'am, this is a civil matter. Actually, it's a federal civil matter. APD has absolutely zero jurisdiction here. We cannot enforce your HOA bylaws, and we cannot order him to stop digging as long as he has that federal paperwork." Brenda gasped, clutching the collar of her pastel cardigan. "You're just going to let him destroy the neighborhood? Because of some law from the 1800s? "Ma'am," Harrison said, his voice hardening slightly, "unless he throws a rock through your window, we cannot intervene. The man has a federal permit to mine his yard. If you want him to stop, you're going to have to take it up with a federal judge. Until then, I suggest you stay off his property." Harrison tipped his hat to me, turned around, and walked back to his cruiser. The younger officer followed. They got in, turned off their flashing lights, and drove away, leaving Brenda standing alone on the sidewalk, completely legally castrated. I looked at her. She looked at me. The silence was thick and incredibly satisfying. "So," I said, giving her a bright, cheerful smile. "About that $1 late fee. Should I still drop a check in the lockbox, or are we good?" Brenda let out a sound that was half sob, half scream, spun on her heel, and power-walked back to her Mercedes. She slammed the door so hard I thought the window was going to shatter, and peeled out down the street. I turned back to my property. Jim was leaning out of the cab of the excavator, grinning from ear to ear. "Boss," Jim called out, wiping a streak of dirt off his forehead. I gotta admit, I have never seen a cop back down from a binder before. That was a thing of beauty. We keep digging? "Oh, we keep digging, Jim," I said, putting my hands on my hips and looking at the beautiful, chaotic trench tearing through my yard. "In fact, I think we need to go deeper, because tomorrow we bring in the geological surveyor, and I have a very strong feeling this vein is going to lead us straight to the clubhouse." Honestly, the next morning I woke up, and the reality of what I was doing actually, fully set in. I was literally running an active mine in the middle of a gated community. I mean, my front yard looked like a meteor had struck it. But I guess when you're this deep into legally ruining an HOA, you don't just stop at a trench. You go for the absolute jugular. I needed proof that there was actually a mineral vein down there. To exploit the most devastating loophole in the 1872 General Mining Act, I needed science. So, I hired a geological surveyor. I found this guy named Dr. Eris Thorne. He was exactly what you would picture if you combined a disgruntled geology professor with a guy who spends way too much time on Reddit. Eris showed up in a Subaru Outback, wearing cargo shorts with 15 pockets, hiking boots, and a t-shirt that said, "Nice Chert." He took one look at my neon orange PVC boundary markers and Jim's massive yellow excavator idling in the driveway, and he literally just started giggling. "Okay, I mean, when you called me and said you had a severed mineral estate in Auburn, I assumed we were going out into the woods," Eris said, hauling this massive piece of equipment out of his trunk. It looked like a cross between a lawnmower and a prop from Ghostbusters. "You didn't tell me I was going to be doing ground-penetrating radar next to a decorative water feature." "Eris, honestly, the decorative water feature is part of the problem," I told him, handing him a cup of coffee. "Jim here has been digging my exploratory adit, but we need to map the subsurface quartz vein. I need to know exactly where it goes, literally every inch of it." Jim leaned out of the cab of the excavator and spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "You point the weird lawnmower, Doc, and I'll dig where you tell me." Eris spent the next 3 hours pushing this ground-penetrating radar machine back and forth across my lawn, staring intently at a ruggedized iPad. Every so often he would stop, make a little hum of approval, and spray a dot of pink marking paint on the grass. Jim followed him, ripping open the earth wherever Eris pointed. By noon, half the neighborhood had gathered at the end of the street, just watching us in stunned, horrified silence. I saw Kyle, the pool kid, filming us on his phone. Brenda was nowhere to be seen, but I knew she was probably barricaded in her faux Tuscan fortress, calling every politician in Placer County trying to get me black-bagged. Finally, Eris powered down the radar and walked over to me, wiping sweat off his forehead. He had this massive, completely unhinged grin on his face. "Okay, so, I have good news, and I have absolutely hilarious news," Eris said, pulling up a 3D map on his iPad. "The good news is, you actually do have a massive, intact quartz vein running right under this property. It's a textbook hydrothermal deposit. Back in the 1890s, they just missed it by about 50 yards. You're sitting on the apex of a legitimate gold-bearing lode." "And the hilarious news?" I asked, leaning over to look at the screen. The hilarious news, Aris said, tracing a glowing red line on the iPad with his finger, is the trajectory of the vein. See this spot here? This is the apex, the top edge of the vein. It breaches the bedrock right under your driveway, but it dips at about a 45-degree angle. He zoomed out on the map, showing the property lines of the Whispering Pines subdivision overlaid on the radar data. It dips directly east, Aris continued, his voice shaking with suppressed laughter. It runs completely under the street, straight beneath the community clubhouse, right under their Olympic-sized swimming pool, and terminates somewhere beneath the foundation of the property adjacent to the clubhouse, which, according to the county assessor data I just pulled, belongs to a Brenda... Wait, let me check the last name. I know her last name, Aris, I interrupted, staring at the screen. I could literally feel my heart beating out of my chest. It was too perfect. It was like the universe had personally handcrafted this geological formation just to spite the HOA. The vein goes under the clubhouse and Brenda's house? Directly under them, Aris confirmed. And I mean, like, shallow, too. Maybe 30 feet down. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. I just threw my head back and laughed until my ribs hurt. Jim was looking at me like I had finally snapped. But I didn't care. Aris, I said, catching my breath. Tell me about the Apex Law. Aris's eyes lit up. He knew exactly what I was thinking. Oh man, the Apex Law, also known as extralateral rights, Section 26 of the General Mining Act of 1872. If you locate a valid claim, and the apex, the top of the vein, is situated entirely within your boundary markers, then I own the vein downward, I finished for him, my brain racing. Even if it goes outside my vertical property lines, even if it dips underneath someone else's surface property. Exactly, Aris said, nodding furiously. As long as you stay within the end lines of your claim, you have the exclusive, federally protected right to follow that vein wherever it leads. You essentially own a subterranean tunnel right through the neighborhood. The surface owners have no rights to the minerals beneath them, and more importantly, they cannot legally obstruct your access to your federal lode. I mean, honestly, this was the nuclear option. Brenda had tried to take my house over $1. I was about to take her entire clubhouse. I paid Aris his consulting fee, added a massive tip for the sheer joy he had brought into my life, and spent the rest of the afternoon in my home office drafting the most aggressive, legally terrifying documents of my entire life. I hired a specialized property rights attorney out of Sacramento just to review my paperwork and make sure everything was bulletproof. He charged me $500 an hour, but it was worth every single penny when he called me back, laughing so hard he was wheezing to tell me my federal injunction was structurally sound. The HOA Board of Directors met on the last Thursday of every month in the clubhouse's executive conference room. It was a ridiculous, self-important space with a massive mahogany table and fake leather chairs. At 7 p.m. on Thursday, I walked through the double glass doors of the clubhouse. I wasn't wearing my hard hat this time. I was wearing a sharp, tailored suit. Behind me was a licensed process server named Dave, a massive, unsmiling guy who looked like a bouncer. We walked right past the front desk, down the hallway, and pushed open the doors to the conference room. The entire board was there. Brenda was sitting at the head of the table, clutching a gavel. Next to her was an older guy in a cheap suit, who I recognized as Mr. Sterling, the corporate attorney retained by the management company. There were 4 other board members, all of whom looked completely exhausted. When I walked in, the room went dead silent. Brenda's face immediately contorted into a mask of pure rage. "Excuse me!" she shrieked, slamming her gavel on the table. "This is a closed executive session. You are completely out of order. Get out before I call the police." "Brenda, we both know the police aren't going to do anything," I said calmly, walking up to the table. I gestured to Dave. Dave stepped forward and dropped a massive, thick stack of legal documents right in front of Brenda. Then he dropped a second stack in front of Mr. Sterling. "You have been served," Dave said in a deep, booming voice. He turned and walked out of the room. Brenda stared at the papers like they were covered in anthrax. "What is this nonsense?" "That," I said, leaning on the mahogany table, "is a federal injunction, filed in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of California. It is naming the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, and you personally, Brenda, as defendants in a federal property dispute." Mr. Sterling, the lawyer, slowly picked up his copy. He adjusted his glasses and started scanning the first page. I watched his eyes dart back and forth. I watched the exact moment his legal brain processed the citations. The color completely drained from his face. "What does it say, Richard?" Brenda demanded, looking at the lawyer. "Is he trying to sue us over the late fees? Because our bylaws clearly state we have immunity from civil suits regarding fee collections." "Brenda, shut up," Mr. Sterling whispered. The entire board gasped. Brenda looked like she had just been slapped. "Richard," she gasped. "I said shut up, Brenda," Sterling repeated, his voice shaking slightly as he flipped to the third page. He looked up at me, terror in his eyes. You claimed the severed mineral estate? You filed a BLM load claim?" "I did," I smiled. "And I hired a surveyor. Which brings us to the really fun part, Mr. Sterling. Have you read the section on extralateral rights yet?" Sterling quickly flipped to the section containing Eris's geological survey maps. He stared at the red line intersecting the clubhouse and Brenda's house. A small bead of sweat formed on his forehead. "I guess I'll just explain it to the room, since your counsel looks like he's about to pass out," I said, straightening up and buttoning my suit jacket. Under the 1872 General Mining Act, because the apex of a valid quartz vein sits on my claim, I have the exclusive supreme federal right to follow that vein underneath adjacent properties. That vein runs directly under this clubhouse and directly under your house, Brenda. "So what?" Brenda sneered, recovering some of her false bravado. "You can't dig under our buildings. It's private property." "Actually, I can," I corrected her gently. "But the problem is, Brenda, your clubhouse and your house are currently obstructing my access to a federally protected mining operation. By maintaining these structures over my active vein without a prior mineral rights agreement, you are illegally impeding federal commerce." I tapped the stack of papers in front of her. "That injunction demands the immediate demolition of the Whispering Pines clubhouse pool so that I can begin placer mining operations to extract the gold," I said, my voice dropping to a dead serious, icy tone. "Furthermore, it seeks damages for the unlawful obstruction of my lode. My legal counsel estimates the lost mineral value at roughly $4.2 million. The room erupted. 2 board members actually stood up and backed away from the table. Brenda's jaw hit the floor. "You can't do this," she screamed. "You can't tear up the pool. We have a summer barbecue next week." "Brenda, he absolutely can," Mr. Sterling interrupted, throwing the paperwork down on the table. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "The 1872 Act is absolute ironclad federal law. If he has the BLM patent and the survey proves the apex is on his claim, he has the extralateral rights. We don't own the mineral estate. We can't stop him from following the vein. If we try to fight this in federal court, it will cost the HOA hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we will lose. The judge will order us to allow him access." "So what are you saying?" Brenda demanded, her voice shrill and panicked. "I'm saying you are completely screwed," Sterling said bluntly. "He has us dead to rights." I let the silence hang in the air for a long, agonizing moment. I looked at each of the board members, letting them fully digest the fact that their petty little kingdom was currently sitting on top of an active volcano of federal litigation. "Honestly, I don't really want to mine the clubhouse pool," I said finally, breaking the silence. "I mean, it sounds like a lot of work, and the chlorine would probably mess up the heavy machinery." They all looked at me, a glimmer of desperate hope in their eyes. "But," I continued, holding up a single finger, "I am willing to sign a permanent, irrevocable waiver of my extralateral surface access rights for the HOA property and Brenda's property. I will legally agree not to tear up the clubhouse, and I won't touch Brenda's house. But I have a few conditions." I pulled a single sheet of paper from my inside jacket pocket and slid it across the table to Mr. Sterling. "Condition 1, I said. The Whispering Pines Homeowners Association immediately and permanently waives any and all fees, assessments, and penalties associated with my property. Forever." "Done," Sterling said instantly, before Brenda could even open her mouth. "Condition 2, I continued. The HOA issues a formal written apology, drafted by me, acknowledging the harassment and illegal overreach regarding my $1 underpayment." "Absolutely," one of the other board members chimed in, nodding frantically. "Condition 3, I said, leaning in and looking directly into Brenda's eyes. "Brenda resigns as president of the board, effective immediately, and she cannot run for any board position in this community ever again." Brenda shot out of her chair. "You can't dictate who runs the board. This is a democracy." "This is a hostage negotiation, Brenda," I replied coldly, "and I'm holding the federal mining rights. Sign the paper, step down, or Jim and his Caterpillar excavator will be doing swan dives into the deep end of the community pool by Tuesday morning." She looked at Mr. Sterling. He just nodded slowly. She looked at the other board members. They were all staring at her with undisguised contempt. They were entirely willing to throw her to the wolves to save their precious clubhouse. Brenda's hands were shaking as she reached for a pen. She didn't say a word. She just scribbled her signature on the resignation line of my conditions sheet, threw the pen across the room, grabbed her purse, and stormed out of the conference room. The remaining board members scrambled over each other to sign the agreement. I took the paper, folded it neatly, and put it back in my pocket. "Gentlemen," I said, giving them a polite nod, "it has been a pleasure doing business with you. Have a great summer barbecue." The aftermath was honestly the most peaceful 6 months of my entire life. The HOA lawyers processed the paperwork with terrifying speed. My house was permanently flagged in the management company's system as exempt do not engage. I never received another letter about the height of my grass, the color of my mailbox, or a single late fee ever again. The new HOA president was a retired accountant who was so terrified of me he practically bowed when I drove past him on the street. As for Brenda, the humiliation was too much for her. Stripped of her power and entirely ostracized by the board she used to terrorize, she put her faux Tuscan fortress on the market 2 weeks later. She sold it at a slight loss just to get out quickly, packing up her silver Mercedes and moving to a condo in Nevada. I like to think she's currently harassing someone over a slightly misaligned welcome mat in a completely different state. I kept Jim on the payroll for 1 more day to fill in the massive exploratory trench in my front yard. I mean, the HOA couldn't legally force me to fill it in, but honestly, it was an eyesore, and I wanted my lawn back. I brought in some fresh topsoil, seeded it, and planted a really lovely row of heirloom tomatoes right over the apex of my federal gold lode. They grew spectacularly well. I never gave up the mining claim, though. Once a year, to satisfy the federal assessment work requirements, I drag a lawn chair out to the edge of my property, hook up the garden hose, and spend a couple of hours panning the dirt runoff near the street. I even found a few microscopic flakes of gold once. I keep them in a little glass vial on my desk, right next to the framed canceled certified letter from Brenda demanding $451. It cost me a few $1,000s in excavator rentals, surveying fees, and lawyer consultations to pull off the ultimate legal reverse UNO card. But honestly, the look on Brenda's face when she realized she was being legally outflanked by Ulysses S. Grant, that was absolutely priceless, And that, folks, is why you never ever mess with a man over a single dollar. Stay sovereign, stay legally dangerous, and I'll see you in the next case.